I know I'm gonna get a lot of hate for saying this, but I've actually become a lot more Pokemon pilled recently with this whole Palworld versus Nintendo situation, and after doing a little bit of digging and, tying the red string across the conspiracy board, I'm starting to think that there might be a lot more to the Nintendo lawsuit situation than meets the eye. And let me just clarify real quick that this isn't some sort of anti-Palworld video. I'm someone who really enjoys playing Palworld, and I'm excited to see what more they can come up with the franchise. I also don't agree with Nintendo resorting to throwing out patent lawsuits for gameplay mechanics, because I think that hurts the gaming industry as a whole, and if they do end up winning this lawsuit, I think it could set a bad precedent for future lawsuits to happen. But the reason as to why they're doing all of this actually starts to make a lot of sense when you see what's been happening behind the scenes with Palworld, and how it's all Nintendo that's being forced to go as a defensive as a response, instead of them being the big bad corporation that's just harassing the small indie company. So the reason we're talking about this today is because Pocketpair, the creators of Palworld, recently came out with a statement giving out details about how things are going with the lawsuit. In the document that they posted, they detailed about how Nintendo's suing them for 3 specific patents that were infringed. They're asking for an injunction against Palworld, and they're asking for a payment of 5 million yen plus late payment damages to both the Pokemon Company and Nintendo for a total about 10 million yen, about $60,000 USD, which is really just pennies when you think about how much money Palworld made and how well they're doing now. 60K is just honestly nothing, but why would Nintendo be asking for such a miserable amount? Well, my guess here would be that at the end of the day, it's not so much about the money that Nintendo's worried about. What they really do care about is the injunction, meaning that they want Palworld to stop doing what they're infringing on, because they see that as a bigger threat over the long run, over just $60,000, And if you look at the patents that we're talking about here, one of them is literally about the mechanic of throwing an item to catch a character inside a game space. So like the mechanic of capturing Pokemons and pals, basically. I think it's a stupid lawsuit to be fighting over. I agree with you. There's plenty of games out there that already have this sort of like creature capturing mechanic on them, and Nintendo doesn't really do anything about it. And this is usually the part where we all just collectively get together and laugh and hate at Nintendo because, well, here we go again. Nintendo with the frivolous lawsuits, it's what they do best. I once heard someone say that Nintendo's really just a law firm company that just happens to have a gaming division because of how litigious they are. But again, hear me out. I think this is all going to start to make sense real soon, because I don't know if you guys remember, Nintendo originally didn't have a problem with Palworld existing in the market. Like, do you remember that feeling we all had when Palworld first launched? It was like the entire world just stood still for a moment and watched as this small indie game from a small-ass company just spat in the face of the biggest media franchise in the world with the most blatant rip-off character designs we've ever seen. I remember that everybody was just waiting for that big lawsuit drop to happen from Nintendo, because Pocketpair wasn't technically being shy about the fact that they were copying Pokemon designs. I'm sure we've all seen the side-by-side comparisons at this point. Some of the character models were just copy-pasted and then just slightly altered. But the lawsuit from Nintendo never came. I'm sure you guys remember that there was that one message from Nintendo saying that they were aware of the existence of Palworld, but there was no announcement from their part saying that they were going to take any action against them. Like, in my opinion, they probably saw Palworld for what it was. It was a rip-off game that sold millions of copies. I'm sure they had plenty of reasons to sue Pocketpair for copyright infringement back then, but I don't know, maybe they just thought it wasn't worth it since it wasn't like a one-to-one ripoff. It's not like they were putting Pikachu on the cover of the Palworld box art or anything. But I think what changed over time, and the reason why Nintendo decided to go after Pocketpair months down the road, and how we got to this point that we are now, is because of what happened back in July of 2024 that actually, surprisingly, ended up solidifying Palworld as a legitimate threat to Pokemon's dominance. You see, back in July, Pocketpair made the announcement that they were going into business with Sony Music Entertainment and Aniplex to create Palworld Entertainment Inc., a brand new company that was going to focus on accelerating the multifaceted global development of Palworld. So essentially, Pocketpair did what Game Freak originally did with Nintendo and Creatures Inc. to create the Pokemon Company. It's the exact same strategy. So they took a game that was originally just from a small indie project that Nintendo couldn't be bothered to deal with, and now they're turning it into a global media superpower that has Sony's funding, it has Aniplex's publishing, and can now properly compete with Nintendo in terms of like making, Palworld games games, Palworld plushies, animes, all that fun stuff that Nintendo has. And I mean, Sony's been doing pretty terrible in video games for the past few years, with only a few bangers here and there, and after losing hundreds of millions of dollars on Concord's flop, well, now it looks like they have their little ticket to success by having their own Pokemon-like franchise. So Nintendo's responses to wanting to sue Pocketpair was never really about abusing their power to harass the small indie company that just wanted to make a quick buck off of copy-pasted characters. It's about the fact that this now turned into a Sony versus Nintendo battle, where Sony's using a game that ripped off Pokemon's designs, which is arguably, the most important and most popular thing about Pokemon, to basically create their direct competitor. Like, think about it for a second. Nintendo originally didn't have a problem with Palworld. They also haven't had any problems with other small creature capturing games like Temtem or Cassette Beasts or anything like that. And heck, even some of the fan-made Pokemon games that just straight up commit copyright infringement in broad daylight, Nintendo usually doesn't go after them unless they get too popular. Like Pokemon Uranium, for example, which was a fan-made game that got over 1.5 million downloads before it was taken offline. And the most likely reason why Nintendo didn't do anything was because at the end of the day, none of those were actual threats to Pokemon, right? Like, you gotta remember that Pokemon is so much more than just the video games. The characters themselves are what carry most of the weight for the brand. Like, nobody cares what Pikachu's doing, as long as Pikachu's the one who's doing the thing. So you got card games, you got plushies, you got the animes and the merch. All of that stuff is what really matters to Nintendo. But now Palworld, going under the Sony umbrella, Nintendo's biggest competitor, that's definitely a problem. That's why the lawsuits didn't happen until September 2024, 2 months after the Sony announcement. Like, if you think about it, if you just put everything on the timeline, it all fits perfectly. This isn't Nintendo trying to abuse their power as a larger company to go on the offensive and shut down the little guy. This is actually Nintendo going on the defensive to protect their IP as a response to Sony wanting to take the pals from Palworld that were ripped off Pokemon designs and put them next to the Pikachu plushies at all the Walmarts and Targets around the world. But because it's so easy to hate on Nintendo since they have a horrible track record when it comes to this whole legal stuff, and because they're usually seen as the bad guys in every single situation, well, a lot of people automatically just see this as a part of, like an overreach from their part. And now I don't really know why they decided to sue for patent rights instead of copyright infringement. Maybe it has to do with the way that copyright infringement just works differently in different countries around the world. I still don't agree with the fact that Nintendo wants to sue for patent infringement of gameplay mechanics, because I think that's a net negative for the gaming industry in the future. But when I started seeing this whole lawsuit from the perspective of it being a Sony versus Nintendo thing and not a Pocketpair versus Nintendo, well, suddenly everything started to click. And because I knew that once I saw the lawsuit that was only going to go for something as low as $60,000, I just knew something was a little fishy there. I also think it's important to note that Pocketpair themselves, despite the fact that they're universally cheered on over here in the United States, they're actually not liked at all. They're actually kind of despised in Japan. Like, I was seeing that a lot of smaller Japanese developers and gamers over there actually side with Nintendo on this whole legal battle, and they see that Pocketpair is just being disingenuous with the fact that they're reporting incomplete information and that they're coming out and portraying themselves on social media as the victims in this situation. They still treat this whole situation like they're the small indie company that's getting abused by Nintendo, and they're here to stand up for the little guy, while not mentioning that they're basically part of the big corporations now as well. On their latest post, they also mentioned how Nintendo's trying to sue Palworld for the creature capturing mechanic, despite the fact that Palworld released before the patents were submitted, and that Nintendo here is just trying to take retroactive action. But they don't point out the fact that the patents had already been filed and they've been in play since all the way back in 2021. So I don't think that this is a good versus bad type situation. I think both companies are doing bad to try to get ahead of the competition. Palworld with the ripped character designs and mechanics while pretending to be the victims in this situation, and Nintendo with going after them for patent infringements and potentially setting a bad precedence for future lawsuits that are going to affect the way that game developers can make unique experiences for people. And well, like I mentioned, this is not really an anti-Palworld or pro-Nintendo video. I just think that there's more to the situation than what we see at the surface level, and just because someone is being targeted by Nintendo doesn't automatically make them right. Even though we all love to call out Nintendo, we all love to hate on them for their horrible practices, I just think that Sony entering the picture here and being a legitimate competitor, it's what really just changed the rules of the game. Maybe this whole competition will actually motivate Nintendo to put a lot more effort into their Pokemon games. At the end of the day, I think the people that benefit the most out of this situation is obviously, us, the consumers, because that means that Nintendo will have to put in a lot more effort to make better games, and then we also get games like Palworld like that, It's a lose-lose situation for them, but I think it's a win win-win situation for us at the end of the day. So I would love to hear what you guys think about this whole situation. Leave your thoughts, leave a comment, let me know. All right? But yeah, that's all I really wanted to talk about with you guys, so thank you guys for watching.